The dress wasn't even supposed to be white. I'd ordered ivory, that soft, forgiving shade that doesn't demand anything from the room. But when the garment bag arrived at my hotel door the morning of the wedding, the fabric inside was the kind of white that catches light and holds it. Bright. Unavoidable. The kind of white that makes people look twice. I stood there in my robe staring at it for a full minute, the plastic still half unzipped, and thought about calling the boutique. Thought about pulling out the navy wrap dress folded in my suitcase. Thought about a lot of things. I put on the white dress. It was Maya's wedding, and Maya had insisted. "You're my maid of honor, Hannah. You wear what I picked." So technically the fault belonged to her taste, and the boutique's incompetence in equal measure. That's what I told myself as I zipped it up. That's what I told myself as I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. 3 years had passed since I'd worn anything that made me feel exposed like that. 3 years of gray blazers and sensible flats, and a life I'd rebuilt so carefully it barely made noise. The ceremony was held at the Whitmore Estate, 40 minutes outside of Chicago, on a Saturday in late October, when the trees had gone amber, and the sky was doing that thing where it looks painted. The kind of setting that makes people emotional before anything has even happened. I'd driven up the previous evening, checked into one of the smaller rooms the venue kept for the wedding party, and spent the night staring at the ceiling thinking about logistics, flower arrangements, the toast I still hadn't finished writing. Anything that wasn't the name on the guest list I'd seen 2 weeks ago, when Maya slid her laptop across the brunch table and said, casual as anything, "Oh, I forgot to mention, Hyunwoo's coming. He and Daniel go way back. Is that okay? Is that okay?" I'd said yes, of course. I'd smiled and said it was fine. It was 3 years ago. We were adults. I'd meant every word when I said it. But lying in that hotel room the night before, listening to the old house settle around me, I wasn't entirely sure I still meant it. The morning moved fast the way wedding mornings always do. Too many people in too small a space, hairpins everywhere. Someone's bouquet arriving slightly wilted. Maya crying twice before noon for reasons that had nothing to do with sadness. I stayed busy. Busy was easy. Busy meant I didn't have to think about the parking lot filling up outside, or the low murmur of arriving guests drifting through the window. By the time the ceremony started, I had almost convinced myself it would be fine. I walked down the aisle ahead of Maya, holding a bouquet of white ranunculus that trembled slightly in my hands. From the cold, I decided, even though the indoor chapel was perfectly warm. I kept my eyes forward. The rows of seated guests blurred at the edges of my vision, faces soft and indistinct, and I focused on the altar, on the flowers, on placing one foot in front of the other, without my heels catching on the runner. I was almost at the front when I felt it. Not heard, not saw. Felt. The way you feel a drop in temperature before you understand where the draft is coming from. A stillness in one specific part of the room that didn't match the gentle shuffling and murmuring of everyone else. I don't know what made me turn. Some old instinct. Something that had apparently survived 3 years of deliberate forgetting. He was seated near the middle of the left side, 3rd row from the aisle. Dark suit, of course, always dark. And that same stillness he'd carried everywhere like a second skin. The tattoos at his throat were barely visible above his collar, just the edge of the ink I'd once traced with my fingers in a life that no longer felt real. He wasn't looking at the altar. He wasn't watching Maya's empty spot at the back of the aisle. He was looking directly at me. And he had stopped. Whatever polite, contained expression he'd been wearing for the other guests, that careful social mask I knew better than anyone, it was gone, not replaced by anything dramatic. Hyunwoo didn't do dramatic. But there was a fraction of a second, just a fraction, where something passed across his face that I had no name for anymore. His eyes moved from my face down to the dress and back up, and he went very, very still. I turned away before I could read anything else into it. My hands were no longer trembling from the cold. The ceremony was beautiful, Genuinely. Maya and Daniel said their vows with the kind of quiet certainty that makes everyone in the room secretly reassess their own life choices. And I stood at the altar holding my bouquet and smiling and feeling like I was watching everything through glass. My toast notes were folded in the small clutch I'd handed to the bridesmaid behind me. I had written something about love being a choice you make every morning, which I'd thought was clever when I wrote it at 2 a.m. 3 days ago, and now seemed unbearably ironic. I didn't look at the third row again. The cocktail hour was held in the estate's east garden, heaters set up along the stone paths, servers moving through the crowd with champagne flutes, and small plates of things I couldn't have named. I took a glass I didn't drink, and stationed myself near Maya, which felt strategic and also cowardly, and I was at peace with both of those things. The light was going golden, the way October light does in the late afternoon, and somewhere behind me, a string quartet was playing something I almost recognized. I was doing fine. I was doing genuinely, honestly fine. Until Daniel's hand appeared at the edge of my vision, and he said, "Hannah, I want to introduce you to someone." And I turned, and there was Hyunwoo standing 2 feet away from me with a glass of something amber in his hand, and his eyes already on my face like he'd been watching me cross the garden before I even knew he was there. 3 years. He looked exactly the same. That was the unfair part. The same sharp line of his jaw, the same way he held himself. Not rigid, just contained. Like everything inside him was under a pressure the rest of the world couldn't measure. He was slightly taller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just spent 3 years shrinking the memory of him down to something manageable. "Hannah." He said my name the way he always had. Not a question, not a greeting exactly, just an acknowledgement, like he was confirming something to himself. Daniel was already smiling and moving away, entirely unaware that he had just walked off and left me standing in the middle of a garden in a white dress in front of the only man I had ever truly not known how to leave. "Hyunwoo." My voice came out steadier than I deserved. "It's been a while." He looked at me for a moment without saying anything. Around us, the party continued. Laughter, glasses clinking, the quartet shifting into something slower. And none of it seemed to touch the small, pressurized bubble of silence that had formed between us the moment our eyes met. "You look..." He stopped. Started again, differently. "You're well?" "I am," I said. "You?" He nodded once. The amber liquid in his glass caught the fading light. And then one of his men, because there were always men nearby, that had never changed, stepped close and murmured something in Korean near his ear, and Hyunwoo's jaw tightened slightly, and he looked away from me just long enough that I could breathe. When he looked back, something had shifted, settled. The mask was back in place, careful and composed. But his eyes stayed on me like he hadn't decided what to do with me yet. Like 3 years had not, in fact, been long enough. The reception hall smelled like candles and fresh flowers and the kind of expensive catering that makes everything feel slightly unreal. I found my seat at the head table, unfolded my toast notes, and read them 3 times without absorbing a single word. Around me, the room filled gradually, chairs scraping, voices layering over each other. The soft orchestral playlist Maya had spent 2 months curating, drifting from speakers hidden somewhere in the raftered ceiling. It was a beautiful room. High windows, candlelight everywhere, round tables draped in ivory linen. The kind of setting that made people lean into each other and remember why they'd come. I refolded my notes and looked up. Hyunwoo was seated at a table diagonal to mine, close enough that I could see him clearly without trying, far enough that I had no reason to acknowledge it. He was already seated when I looked, jacket still on, posture the same as always. Not stiff, never stiff, just present in a way most people weren't. There were 2 men at the table with him I didn't recognize, and an older couple who seemed to know Daniel's family. They were talking. Hyunwoo was listening, or appearing to listen, with that particular quality of stillness that had always made it impossible to tell whether he was engaged or simply waiting for the conversation to become relevant to him. He wasn't looking at me. I told myself that was a relief. Dinner came in courses, and I ate without tasting much of it, and I laughed at the right moments when the best man made his speech, and I kept my shoulders back and my expression easy, and I was fine. I was completely fine, right up until the moment I reached for my wine glass and knocked it sideways. It didn't shatter. The glass was thick-stemmed, good quality, and it simply tipped and rolled and spilled a generous arc of red wine across the white tablecloth and the edge of my dress before I could get my hand under it. The sound it made was small, barely a sound at all. But in the particular acoustics of a quiet moment between courses, it was enough. The bridesmaid to my left gasped. The groomsmen on my right pushed back from the table instinctively. Maya, across the curved head table, looked over with wide eyes. "I'm so sorry," I said, to no one specifically, to everyone, already reaching for a cloth napkin and pressing it uselessly against the spreading stain on my skirt. The wine was dark against the white fabric. Obvious. Permanent, probably. "I'm so sorry, It's okay," Maya said quickly. "Hannah, it's fine. It doesn't matter." But I was already standing, napkin still in hand, face warm, entirely aware that in trying to manage the situation quietly, I was now making it more visible by standing up at the head table. A server appeared from somewhere with practiced speed, and I murmured something about the restroom and excused myself, and I walked, not rushed, measured, chin up, toward the hallway that led to the east corridor. The bathroom was empty. Cool tile, soft lighting. The kind of restroom that high-end venues build to make guests feel like the evening is going well, even when it isn't. I set my clutch on the counter and looked at the stain on my dress, and pressed the damp edge of a paper towel against it, and watched it not improve. White dress, I thought. Of course. I stayed in there longer than I needed to. Long enough for my pulse to slow, for the warmth in my face to recede, for the small voice in the back of my head that sounded embarrassingly like anxiety to settle into something quieter. I touched up my lipstick, smoothed my hair, looked myself in the eyes in the mirror, and had a brief, wordless conversation with my own reflection about getting through the rest of the evening without further incident. Then I pushed open the bathroom door and nearly walked directly into a wall of black fabric. I stepped back. Hyunwoo steadied me, one hand at my elbow, brief and certain, there and then gone. And I looked up at him standing in the dim corridor outside the restrooms, with no particular expression on his face, and my heart did something complicated and inconvenient. "What are you doing back here?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Daniel mentioned the east corridor connects to the terrace," he said. Calm. Unhurried. I needed air. It was a reasonable answer. The kind of answer that gave nothing away. I searched his face for something. Amusement. Intention. Anything. And found only that composed, watchful quality that had always made me feel simultaneously seen and unsettled. "The stain won't come out," he said after a moment. I looked down at my dress involuntarily. "I know. Club soda." He said it like a fact, not a suggestion. "The kitchen will have it. If it's been less than 15 minutes, it might work." I stared at him. "You know that?" Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I know a lot of things that seem surprising." That was so precisely him, that slight shift from practical to opaque, the way he could be genuinely helpful and entirely unreadable at the same time, that for a disorienting second I forgot we were strangers now. Forgot the paperwork, the silences. The morning I'd sat in a lawyer's office and signed my name next to his, and watched 3 years of marriage reduce itself to a document. "I should get back," I said. "Hannah." I stopped. He said my name the same way he had in the garden, not asking anything, just placing it in the air between us. "You gave away the apartment," he said. I turned back slowly. "What?" "The one on Wabash." He wasn't looking at me with anything accusatory, just stating it. "You gave it back to the realtor 6 months after. I heard. I had. It had been my name on the lease after the divorce. My choice to keep it or let it go. And I'd let it go because waking up every morning in those rooms had felt like trying to breathe underwater. I hadn't told anyone that. I'd just quietly handed back the keys and moved into a smaller place in Wicker Park and started over. "You were keeping track," I said. It wasn't quite a question. He didn't confirm or deny it. He just looked at me in that corridor with the soft noise of the reception drifting through the walls and the low light catching the edge of his jaw. "The man at table 9, he said then, shifting without warning. "The one who kept looking at you during dinner." I blinked. "What?" "He looked at you 4 times during the first course alone." His voice was the same. Even, controlled, but something beneath it had changed in texture, become slightly denser. "I don't know who he is." I almost laughed. Caught it. "Hyunwoo, we're divorced." "I'm aware." He said it without any particular emotion. "I'm telling you what I noticed." "That's not your business anymore." He was quiet for a moment. In the silence, somewhere behind the walls, the string quartet had started up again, something slow and low that seemed almost deliberately inconvenient. "No," he agreed. "It's not." But he didn't move. Didn't turn toward the terrace he'd claimed to be walking toward. He stood in the corridor with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes on me like I was a problem he was in the process of deciding whether to solve. "You should get the club soda," he said finally. "You should go get your air," I replied. He almost smiled. Almost. That slight, barely there shift at the corner of his mouth that I had once, in a different life, known how to read correctly. He stepped aside to let me pass, and I walked back toward the reception with my stained dress and my folded toast notes, and my heart doing something I was choosing, consciously and firmly, to categorize as residual muscle memory. Nothing more than that. I returned to the table, caught Maya's relieved look, sat down, and poured myself a fresh glass of wine. Table 9 was to my left. I didn't look at it, but I was acutely, unwillingly aware of exactly when Hyunwoo came back through the side door 10 minutes later and returned to his seat without glancing in my direction, or at least, without glancing in my direction while I was looking. There was a difference. I'd learned that the hard way once. The rest of dinner passed in the way that dinners pass when you're performing normalcy while your nervous system runs a separate, quieter program underneath. I gave my toast. I talked about Maya and Daniel and the way they made ordinary Tuesday evenings feel like something worth staying home for, and I meant every word, and my voice only wavered slightly at the end in a way that read as sentiment and was, in fact, something else entirely. People clapped. Maya pressed her hand to her mouth. I sat back down and drank half my wine in one long swallow. When I finally looked at Hyunwoo's table again, he was watching me. He raised his glass, almost imperceptibly. Not a toast, not a gesture with any obvious meaning, just acknowledgement. I looked away first. I always had. The dancing started just after 9. Maya and Daniel had their first dance to something I didn't recognize, but that made half the room reach for tissues anyway. And then the floor opened up, and the lights dropped lower, and the whole evening shifted into that looser, warmer register that wedding receptions move into when the formal part is finally over. People stood, rearranged themselves, found their people. The volume climbed. Someone at the bar laughed too loudly, and nobody minded. I stayed at the head table longer than I should have, pretending to check my phone. There was nothing on my phone. I'd already responded to the one message from my sister asking how the wedding was going. Beautiful, Maya's happy, all good, and the screen had gone dark twice while I sat there using it as a prop. I set it face down on the table and looked at the dance floor and told myself I was just catching my breath. The truth was simpler and more embarrassing. I didn't trust my legs yet. The toast had taken more out of me than I'd anticipated. Not the words, I'd practiced those, but the part where I'd been standing at the front of the room, with every table visible from where I stood, including the one diagonal to mine. I'd kept my eyes on Maya. Mostly. But there had been one moment, just one, somewhere in the middle of the second paragraph, where my gaze had drifted involuntarily to the left, and Hyunwoo had been watching me with an expression I couldn't name, and hadn't been able to stop thinking about since. Focused, that was the word. Like nothing else in the room existed. I picked up my clutch and went to find another drink. The bar was set up near the garden doors, and the small crowd around it was friendly and easy to navigate. I ordered a gin and tonic, mostly because it gave my hand something to do, and turned to lean against the high table beside the bar and let the noise of the room wash over me. From this angle, I could see the whole reception hall. Tables, dance floor, the far corner where a photographer was crouching to get a low shot of Maya and Daniel dancing with Daniel's elderly grandmother between them. I could also see, without meaning to, that Hyunwoo was no longer at his table. I did not look around to find where he'd gone. I actively, deliberately did not do that. You're Hannah, right? Maya's maid of honor? I turned. The man was maybe 35, sandy-haired, easy smile, the loosened tie energy of someone who'd decided the formal portion of his evening was over. He was the one from Table 9, I realized with a small sinking recognition. I hadn't looked at him closely during dinner. Now that I did, he seemed harmless, friendly in that uncomplicated, slightly earnest way that some men had at open-bar events. That's me, I said. Incredible toast. He extended his hand. I'm Brett, college friend of Daniel's. I have to ask, do you write professionally? Because that was genuinely... Thank you, I said. No, I'm in nonprofit management, grant writing, mostly. Still. He settled against the table beside me with the ease of someone who'd never had a conversation he wasn't comfortable in. The part about Tuesday evenings, everyone felt that. I smiled, and it was genuine enough. Brett was pleasant. Brett was uncomplicated. Brett was exactly the kind of low-stakes interaction I needed to prove to myself that this evening was a normal evening, and I was a normal person attending a wedding, and nothing about tonight had weight. We talked for a few minutes. Easy, surface level, the kind of conversation that exists to fill pleasant space. He asked about my work. I asked about his. He said something funny about Daniel in college that made me laugh for real. And then the temperature shifted. I felt it before I understood it. That same drop in the air I'd felt during the ceremony. That particular quality of stillness that arrived just before. Brett felt it too, I think, because his sentence slowed slightly, his smile becoming uncertain, his eyes moving to a point just past my left shoulder. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. Hannah. Hyunwoo's voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I could feel the shift in the air. The photographer is looking for the wedding party. Something about a group photo on the terrace. I turned then. He was standing less than 3 feet away, jacket still perfectly in place, one hand loose at his side. His eyes went to Brett for exactly 2 seconds. Not threatening. Nothing so obvious. Just a look so flat and complete that it communicated everything without saying a single word. Brett straightened slightly. The easy smile didn't disappear, but it became more careful. I didn't hear anything about a photo, I said. Maya asked me to find you. His eyes came back to mine, and I searched them for the lie and found nothing. Nothing was always the problem with Hyunwoo. He could say anything in that even. certain voice and make it sound like documented fact. I should, Brett started. It was nice meeting you, Hyunwoo said to him. Polite. Final. Brett took his drink and drifted, and I watched him go with a feeling that sat somewhere between exasperation and something I refused to examine. Maya did not ask you to find me, I said quietly. Hyunwoo was quiet for a moment. No. So you lied. I redirected, he said, without apparent guilt. There's a difference. I turned to face him fully then, which was a mistake in the sense that it left no comfortable distance between us, and I had to look up at him in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar. Hyunwoo, you cannot do that. You cannot just... He was harmless. He was a perfectly harmless person making normal conversation. He was looking at you the way men look at women they've already decided something about. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. I didn't like it. You don't get to decide what you like anymore. The words came out with more force than I intended, low and tight. We are not married. You have no... I know what we are. He said it quietly, and something in the quietness of it stopped me. Not because it was a concession, because it wasn't. It was just a statement of fact that somehow contained more weight than an argument. I know exactly what we are, Hannah. The room moved around us. Somewhere on the dance floor, someone was doing an enthusiastic and technically poor rendition of what the DJ had announced as the groom's favorite song. Laughter. Glass. The warm yellow light making everything look softer than it was. Then act like it, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then his gaze moved, almost involuntarily, to the stain on my dress. Faded now. Less visible in the low light, but still there. Something passed across his face too quickly for me to catch. You gave the toast, he said. You were good. The shift was so abrupt it took me a second to follow it. Thank you. The Tuesday evening's line. He said it simply, not making anything of it. That was real. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what response would have been safe. He reached past me then. Close. Too close. The sleeve of his jacket brushing my bare arm, and set his glass down on the high table. He smelled exactly the same. That was the detail I hadn't prepared for, hadn't thought to brace against. Whatever he wore, some quiet cedar and dark air combination, it was identical to 3 years ago, and it hit something in my memory that I hadn't meant to leave unlocked. I didn't step back. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing it affected me. So I stood very still and looked at the dance floor and waited. The man who was looking at you from table 9 during dinner, Hyunwoo said, his voice lower now. He came here with someone, a woman in a green dress. She left an hour ago. I turned to look at him. How do you know that? He didn't answer that directly. Of course he didn't. I'm telling you because you should know. I stared at him. The familiar frustration of it, the way he operated with information like it was currency, distributing it selectively, always knowing more than he shared, rose up so cleanly it felt like no time had passed at all. That is not why you're telling me, I said. He held my gaze, neither confirmed nor denied it. Hyunwoo. I picked up my gin and tonic. Go back to your table. I walked away before he could respond, weaving through the edges of the dance floor, finding Maya near the far end and inserting myself into her orbit like a satellite returning to its planet. She grabbed my arm with both hands, champagne glass nearly sloshing. You okay? She asked, reading something in my face. Perfect, I said. She looked past me briefly. Her expression shifted, just slightly, into something sympathetic and knowing and slightly guilty. The look of a woman who had maybe not entirely accidentally seated 2 specific people within sightline of each other at her wedding reception. Maya, I said. I didn't do anything, she said too quickly. Maya. She squeezed my arm. Dance with me. Come on, you can be mad at me while we dance. I let her pull me onto the floor, and I danced, and I laughed at something she shouted in my ear over the music, and I kept my back to the room and did not think about cedar and dark air, and a man who knew which woman at table 9 had arrived with a date and when she'd left. My arms were covered in goosebumps for reasons I was choosing not to investigate. The night got later, and the room got louder, and I made it all the way to 11:15 before the evening turned on me again. It happened simply, the way most things that unravel you happen, not with a dramatic moment, but with a small one. I'd stepped outside onto the terrace for air, just 5 minutes, just enough to let the cold settle the warmth in my face and the noise out of my ears. The terrace ran along the back of the estate, stone railing, bare-branched trees at the edge of the property, the kind of darkness outside the lights that felt dense and complete. 2 other guests were out there when I arrived, a couple, whispering close together near the far end, and by the time I'd been standing at the railing for 3 minutes, they'd gone back inside. I stayed. The cold was clarifying. I pressed my palms flat against the stone railing and looked at the dark tree line and breathed. The evening had been survivable. That was the word I kept returning to. Survivable. Not easy, not clean, but manageable. I had given a good toast. I had danced with Maya. I had navigated 2 separate conversations with Hyunwoo without saying anything I couldn't take back or revealing anything I hadn't meant to. I was going to go back inside in a few minutes, say my goodbyes to Maya and Daniel, go upstairs to my room, and tomorrow morning I would drive back to Chicago, and this would be something I'd gotten through. I was building the structure of that thought very carefully when the terrace door opened behind me. I knew before I turned. The particular quality of the footsteps, unhurried, deliberate, the sound of someone who moved through spaces like they'd already assessed them. Hyunwoo stopped beside me at the railing, not close enough to touch, and looked out at the same darkness I'd been looking at. He didn't say anything immediately. Neither did I. The cold settled between us, and the faint music from inside was muffled now, just a pulse through the stone walls. You used to hate the cold, he said eventually. I still hate the cold. I didn't look at him. I needed a minute. I know. A pause. I saw you come out. Of course he had. Are you going to tell me you were also just getting air? No. Straightforward, at least that. I turned to look at him then, because the honesty of it deserved acknowledgement. He was looking at the tree line, profile clean against the low ambient light from the terrace fixtures, and I was struck again by the unfairness of how unchanged he was. 3 years. Some people softened or sharpened, or showed the time somewhere in their face. Hyunwoo just looked like himself, which had always been the most disarming version of him. What do you want? I asked, not unkind, genuinely asking. He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then, I saw you when you came down the aisle this morning. I know. I saw you too. I wasn't prepared for it. He said it simply, with no apparent embarrassment about the admission. I thought I was. I wasn't. Something pulled tight in my chest. I kept my hands flat on the railing. Hyunwoo, I'm not saying this to complicate your evening. He turned to look at me then, and the directness of it was difficult to hold. I've said very little true things tonight. I wanted to say one. The music from inside shifted to something slower. Through the glass doors I could see the shapes of people moving, the warm gold light, Maya's dress catching the glow as she turned in Daniel's arms. The apartment on Wabash, I said quietly. Why were you keeping track? Because I couldn't stop. No hesitation. I told myself I would. I didn't. I looked down at my hands on the railing. The wine stain on my dress had dried to a faint shadow, barely there in this light. I left because I couldn't keep being afraid, I said. Not of you. I was never afraid of you specifically. I was afraid of how much I disappeared inside of it. Inside of us. I kept getting smaller, and you kept getting... You never got smaller, Hyunwoo. You just got more. And I needed to take up space again. He listened without interrupting. That was one of the things. He had always listened like what you were saying was the only thing happening. I know, he said. Do you? I didn't then. His jaw tightened slightly. I do now. The cold moved through the trees at the edge of the property, a slow stir of branches. I pulled my arms closer without thinking. Hyunwoo shrugged off his jacket. Don't, I said. He paused. Please. My voice was quieter than I intended. Don't do the small things. The jacket and the club soda and telling me about the woman in the green dress. Because you know what they do and I can't. I stopped, steadied. I can't be careful about the big things if you keep doing the small ones. Something shifted in his face, something that looked, briefly, like it cost him. He held the jacket for a moment, then he put it back on. There's a man, he said, after a silence. Lower now. Someone who's been watching the estate since this afternoon. One of my men flagged him 2 hours ago. He's in a gray car on the service road past the east gate. He turned to face me fully, and the social register was gone entirely now, replaced by something more direct and considerably more serious. He's not here for the wedding. The cold felt different suddenly, less clarifying. Who is he here for? I asked, though something in the way Hyunwoo was looking at me had already answered it. Me. His voice was even. Almost certainly, it's a message. Someone testing visibility, seeing where I go, who I'm with. He paused. It's not dangerous, tonight, but I need you to stay inside for the rest of the evening. I stared at him. I'm a guest at a wedding. I know what you are. His eyes held mine. I need you inside, away from the exterior of the building. I'll have someone stay near the door you're using. Hyunwoo. The name came out with the weight of everything I didn't know how to say. This is exactly what I mean. This is exactly the thing. You standing here telling me someone is watching you and I need protection and there will be a man at my door. This is the life I left. I know. He said it without defensiveness. I know that. I'm not asking you to come back to it. I'm asking you to walk back inside and stay there for 2 hours until the event ends and the situation resolves. And if I say no, then I'll stay on this terrace with you until morning if I have to. No drama in it, just fact. I looked at him for a long moment. The weight of it was real. The gray car on the service road, the men he always had nearby, the entire invisible architecture of danger that had surrounded our marriage like weather. I'd learned to stop noticing until I'd stepped outside of it and finally understood what it had been doing to my lungs. I'm not the woman who waited by the window anymore, I said. I know. I built a different life. I know that too. Then why? My voice broke slightly on it, just slightly, and I hated that. Why does it still feel like you're everywhere I turn tonight? He didn't look away. Because I came here and you were in a white dress, he said quietly. And 3 years of trying to be reasonable stopped working the second I saw you walk down that aisle. The music inside had gone softer still. Through the glass, Maya had her head on Daniel's shoulder, eyes closed, entirely unaware of the terrace behind her. I pushed off the railing. I'm going inside, I said. Not because you told me to. I know. Because I'm cold, and the party is almost over, and I want to say goodnight to Maya. Of course. I walked to the terrace door and put my hand on the handle. Behind me, Hyunwoo didn't move, didn't follow. Just stood at the railing in the dark like a man who had learned to be very still while everything he wanted walked away from him. I went inside. The warmth hit me immediately. Sound and light, and the smell of melting candle wax, and the last good hour of a wedding winding gently down. I did not let myself look back through the glass. I almost managed it. I said goodnight to Maya at 11:40. She was glowing the way brides glow at the end of their wedding night, slightly undone, mascara smudged at one corner, champagne flush still warm in her cheeks. More herself than she'd been all day, now that the formal weight of it was over. She held my face in both hands when I hugged her goodbye, and looked at me with that particular Maya expression, the one that saw too much and said it anyway. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Really?" "Really?" I said. She searched my face. "He never stopped, asking about you, through Daniel." She said it carefully, watching for my reaction. "I'm not saying that I just thought you should know, in case it matters." "It doesn't change anything," I said. She nodded slowly, like she believed me and also didn't. Then she pulled me into another hug, tight and brief, and whispered that she loved me, and I told her the wedding was perfect, and that Daniel was lucky, and I meant both things completely. I went upstairs. The room was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Bed still slightly rumpled from my restless night, garment bag folded over the chair, my overnight bag open on the luggage rack. I took off the white dress and hung it carefully over the back of the chair and stood in the quiet in my slip for a moment, looking at the wine stain. Faded, permanent, a record of the evening written into the fabric. I showered, changed into comfortable clothes, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone and thought about calling my sister, and decided it was too late. Thought about reading, thought about sleep, which felt far away. What Maya had said sat in my chest like a stone I was trying not to pick up. He never stopped asking about you. I knew what to do with anger. I had learned that, in the years after the divorce, how to feel it cleanly, acknowledge it, set it down. What I had never entirely figured out was what to do with the specific grief of loving someone whose world made your own smaller. There was no villain in it. That was the part that had taken me the longest to accept. Hyunwoo had never been cruel to me. He had been, in his way, devoted. Fiercely and completely, and in a language that didn't always translate into the kind of life I could breathe inside. The danger wasn't malice. It was architecture. The whole structure of who he was left no room for who I needed to become. Leaving had been the right thing. I still believed that. Sitting on the edge of that bed at midnight in a venue 40 minutes outside of Chicago, I still believed it, with the same quiet certainty I'd carried out of the lawyer's office 3 years ago. And yet, the knock at my door came at 12:20. 3 measured knocks, unhurried, and I knew before I crossed the room. I opened the door without asking who it was, which probably said something I wasn't ready to say out loud. Hyunwoo stood in the corridor, jacket gone now, shirt collar open at the throat, the edge of the tattoo visible in the low hallway light. He looked, for the first time all evening, like he'd put something down. Not undone. Hyunwoo was never undone. But quieter than the composed, contained version he'd maintained through dinner and the terrace and every careful exchange between. "The situation resolved," he said. "The car left an hour ago. I wanted you to know." I leaned against the doorframe. "You could have texted." "I don't have your number anymore." That landed somewhere soft. I'd changed it, 8 months after the divorce, for reasons I'd told myself were practical. "Right." He looked at me for a moment. "I'm leaving in the morning. Early. I won't be at the breakfast." A pause. "I thought it was better if you knew, so you weren't waiting to see if you'd appear." "Yes." I appreciated the honesty of it. It was such a specific kindness, knowing exactly which kind of uncertainty to remove. "The gray car," I said. "Is it always like that? Still?" "Occasionally." His voice was even. Less than it was. "I've made changes the last 2 years." Structural changes. He said it carefully, like he knew how it sounded and wasn't trying to make it sound like more than it was. It's not the same world it was when you were in it. I looked at him. But it's still the world. Yes. No apology for it. No pretense. It's still the world. I nodded slowly. That was what I needed to hear, I realized. Not a promise that things had changed enough, but the truth, said plainly. We had always been better at plain truth when the performance of the day was over. It was the thing I'd missed most, in the strange grief of the first year. Not the life, not the apartment on Wabash, not any specific thing, just this. The late-night version of him, when the control softened slightly at the edges, and he just talked to me like I was the only person in his particular world who got the unedited version. I built something good, I said. My life now. It's quiet, and it's mine, and I'm not small in it. I know. And the way he said it, not resigned, not sad exactly, but something that held both of those things at once, made my throat tight. I can see that. Even tonight, I can see that. Then you understand why I can't. I understand. He said it before I finished, and I believed him. I understood on the terrace. I've understood for a while, if I'm honest. Longer than tonight. Something loosened in my chest. The stone Maya's words had placed there shifted, not gone, but lighter. You drove 4 hours to get here, I said. For Daniel's wedding. Yes. And you knew I'd be here. A pause. Yes. I exhaled slowly. Why? If you already understood. He was quiet for a moment, looking at me in that corridor with the low light and the old house settling around us. Then he said simply, I wanted to see that you were well, in person, not through what I heard secondhand. He paused. I needed to see it for myself. I thought about that. The hyunwoo-ness of it, the inability to simply let a thing remain abstract, the need to verify, to be present, to see with his own eyes. It was the same quality that had made him suffocating to live with and devastating to leave. I'm well, I told him. I'm genuinely, actually well. He looked at me for a long moment. Something settled in his face. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of resolution. Like a question he'd been carrying had finally been answered in a way he could accept. Good, he said. And he meant it. Completely, without qualification. That's enough. He straightened. The corridor was quiet. The whole house quiet now. The wedding entirely over. Everyone folded away into their rooms and their lives. I'll leave you alone, he said. After tonight. I believed that too. Which was, I realized, its own specific kind of grief. The kind that comes not from loss, but from the final clean closing of a door you'd been standing near for 3 years just in case. Take care of yourself, I said. Please. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked down the corridor, unhurried. The way he moved through every space, like he'd already accounted for it. At the far end, where the hallway turned, he stopped, didn't look back. Just paused for one moment, like a man leaving a room he'd memorized. Then he was gone. I stood in the doorway for a little while after. The house was completely still. Outside the narrow window at the end of the hall, the sky had gone deep and dark and unbothered, and the trees at the edge of the estate were just shapes now, quiet in the cold. I went back inside, closed the door softly, lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling. In the morning, I drove back to Chicago with the windows cracked and the radio low. My apartment in Wicker Park was exactly as I'd left it, small and warm and full of the specific disorder of my own habits. Books stacked at angles, the good coffee on the counter, the print above the desk that I'd bought at a street market the summer after the divorce, because I'd wanted one thing in my home that was only ever mine. I made coffee. I sat at the window. I watched the street below do its ordinary Saturday morning business, Dog walkers, a couple with a stroller, a man in a yellow jacket locking his bike to a signpost. The white dress was in a dry cleaning bag on the chair by the door. The stain would probably never fully come out. I decided, somewhere on the drive home, to keep it anyway. Not as anything symbolic. Just because it was a good dress, and one bad evening, didn't have to define what something was worth. I thought about Hyunwoo once more, briefly, the corridor, the terrace, the way he'd said that's enough, and meant it like a door closing gently instead of slamming. Then I turned back to my coffee, and my window, and my small and breathing life, and it was enough. It was finally and fully enough.